Okay, and we're live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or at least the one person who watches this stream. It looks like one of Vladimir Putin's guys have found me, so as I am in a state of as I am under a state of duress, I'm going to begin the prayers in the Eastern form. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory to you, our God, glory to you, Heavenly King, Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who are present everywhere and filling all things, treasury of good things and giver of life. Come and dwell in us and cleanse us of every stain and save our souls, gracious Lord. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. All Holy Trinity, have mercy on us. Lord, forgive us our sins. Master, pardon our transgressions. Holy One, visit and heal our infirmities. For thy name's sake. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen.
Ha! I have one trick up my sleeve. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To thee do we come, before thee do we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer us. This is a Theotokos respecting channel, so yeah. Anyway,
Amen.
tonight's topic. Uh, Originally, I was going to title the stream "The Angla Strike." The Angla strike. Sorry, I can't English right now. The Angla cries out in pain as she strikes herself, but I don't know. That's kind of a That's kind of a bit of a mean-spirited tone. We are going to do a live fisking of the Disenchanted Scholar, who is a very sharp tongue, foul mouth English woman, uh, opining on all things fall of civilization wise. And um, the main bone of contention that Jose and I have with her is the fact that she has a very Darwinian outlook and also a very uh, jam or ZAM outlook. So A is Anglo, M is Masonic, and J or Z, you could probably figure it out. So I'm going to try sharing screen right now. Share screen, uh, Chrome tab. The title of her post that we will be criticizing is "Do Women Just Hate All Men?" Okay. TLDR, yes, but also no. Yes, for their actions and endorsements, not for being male. It's more resentment than hatred, like the hippie slutty boomers. 7,000. I doubt that we're going to get through all of this in what I want to keep under a 2-hour time frame, but
Thank God.
we'll try. So, Jose, at any time you can interject. So I'm going to interject when I feel like I read something that's not good, but Ho- but it's all on you too, Jose. This is going to answer some. This is going to answer some questions I believe merit being taken seriously because it ties into biology and our future. Now, here's the thing that I've noticed with a lot of dissident right speakers who are not Catholic and not Orthodox. They're really heavy into biological determinism, which is why there's a lot of rhetoric regarding R and K selection and a
Mhm.
lot of talk about Darwinism. And the funny thing about biological determinism is that I think that the British kind of worked backwards. They conquered the rest of the world by hook and crook, and then they created this entire mythological system to justify why they're the best. Would you what do you think, Jose?
Yeah, I agree. I was also just going to note that like biological determinism itself. I mean, I've been working on a thesis of this, but I see it as being downstream from Calvin. Um,
Yeah,
there's an
yeah.
element with Calvin. You have the establishment of you have those who are elect and those who are not. And I actually had a debate on Social Galactic with one of the more prominent Calvinists, and he even has a anthropology of there being two different natures of man, and Christ, when his incarnation, adopted one but not the other.
Hmm.
So, and that's not, for the record, that's not standard, Calvinistic systematic, theology, but that is something, a position he took, and I can see where he got to that point, and from there, I was like, oh, this is the spiritual underpinning of biological determinism in a
Okay.
nutshell.
Yeah. Well, I don't care too much about misrepresenting Calvinists because they're wrong. But anyway, moving on. It is brutally honest and true, whatever any woman tells you. I have no reason to lie, remember. I think even the MGTOW, which for those who are unaware, MGTOW means men going their own way. And it was a kind of a misandrist, but really more of a misanthropic movement in the mid 2010s about men who are basically giving up pursuing women, pursuing marriage, and just going their own way, which they like to frame it as going off on a romantic adventure. No girls are allowed, but let's be real here. More often than not, it just means not feeling guilty about spending all their free time fapping to pornography. I think even the MGTOW types would agree with this assessment because it's rooted in Darwin. There goes that god of the English again. Men have all the power, women are mostly sitting there, waiting for them. Now, this is scholars' interpretation of the MGTOW thesis, which, yeah, the thing about the MGTOW thesis is that it's very self aggrandizing and it's also very self unaware. Are the men of today equal to the World War II generation? Yes or no? In terms of genetic fitness, we all know the answer is no. No, they are not. And women definitely resent this. All the vintage trends aren't just longing for the ability to wear twirly dresses and high heels without falling afoul of a rapist immigrant. They subconsciously want the genetic fitness of men back.
I actually wanted to interject something here, which I noticed before, because you mentioned about longing for the ability to wear twirly dresses and high heels without falling afoul of a rapist immigrant. Um, I'll just point out that you look at the places where, even in the countries where you've had, the mass immigration, you've had the massive spike in rapes. Um, at least, how should I put it? The women who are targeted tend not to be the ones who are dressed traditionally, but that's a different story.
Yeah, and the thing is that in most traditional societies, certainly non-Anglo ones, there's it's pretty much unheard of for a woman to go out alone. So, and it's partly because of this. Now, feminists are going to say women need a man to protect them from men, but feminists are dumb, and uh, yeah,
One
that's
could easily say women need a man to protect them from themselves.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's pretty much ingrained in men's nature to uh, protect a woman, or at the very least protect the women in their lives, whether it's their wife, their sisters, or if the man is old enough, and his mother too. No, 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 no. Although women are dressing androgynous to avoid attack by immigrants too, but men refuse to admit this, instead pretending they all wanted to look asexual simultaneously by fluke. Now, I don't think that androgyny is entirely due to self-protection. I think that there's a root in the theosophical movement, certainly, and also in communism to basically equalize, have this forced equalization of the sexes. And this can be seen in, like, for instance, the costume of Mao era China, where they all where all men and women alike wear these hideous uh, gray, dull worker outfits. Yeah. Naturally, none of them will dare tell you this, especially the trad girls' so called conservathoughts. Do they seem happy to you? Does a bitterness creep in, much like sad MGTOWs? They believe that they've made a compromise out of the measly postmodern pickings. Their husband would not be their first choice. Speak for yourself, unmarried woman. If they could get a World War II hero type instead. All women know this, and that is why modern housewives are mocked for settling. Settling for inferior quality men, not to settle down. In surveys, such women want to get married, so it's a quality thing. Women are the gatekeepers of genetic quality in the land. Men are the protectors of the land itself. Remember that. Men are in denial about the sexual selection at play amongst women. All women value all women value men for is genetic fitness. Now I'm going to have to stop right there because um, we have to think about the context of England, the United States. Well, let's just say England because this is an English writer.
Mhm.
England in the past half century. Why is it that we have why is it that we supposedly have this more or less homogeneous environment and the women are not biting? Now, um, the Disenchanted Scholar gets into this in the uh, the other corpus of her works that, oh, these adventurous men are going out into the far sides of the world to get some exotic hooch. But and in fact I think she mentions it in this article too, but it's like, what is it about women domestically in England that the men do not find desirable? Just putting that out there.
I was also wondering if women are the ones, if all they value is genetic fitness, then why is it that, the Anglo-Saxon has such terrible teeth?
Well, I think, I don't know, they must some have some kind of oral blindness, who knows? But I mean, their teeth are perfectly evolved to eat horrible food.
This is true.
Hmm. Nobody cares about bank balance if you're so old, paternal age, you make an autistic kid. Harvey Weinstein says hi. Genetic fitness uber alles. It is the reason for both to live. It is the reason for sexual reproduction. A combination of genetic fitness. So women are effectively in an arms race to claim the best man as their provider. Sperm donor means nothing, or the ghetto would be doing great. Now, again, here is disenchanted scholars' genetic determinism creeping up again. Um,
And reductionism.
yeah, reductionism. Like, you were a married man, Jose. Did you think at all when you picked your wife, you know what? This woman is going to uh, help my children express codominance in their HLA haplotyping.
Definitely not. It was. It's funny too. It was making me think of because I had my wife shared part of her journal that she kept, and it was funny because what do you call it? Um, she mentions here how like that all women value for men is genetic fitness, and the reason why my wife wanted to hang out with me was because I knew the scriptures really well, and she wanted to learn, and because she had questions. Um, so, and that led to a date. So, it's it's just humorous to me. It's very alien to. I mean, not just Hispanidad. It's alien to the Slavic mindset. It's alien to the Greek mindset, or even the Arab mindset. It's and I actually was thinking about this too. I was thinking how for all the talk of like you'll hear your Wignats talk about how if only the Spanish didn't intermarry with the natives, etc. I actually now I've realized, wait a second, I can point out now there are actually far more white Hispanos, like phenotypically white Hispanos, than there are Anglo-Saxons on the planet. Uh, Even with all of the intermarriage, it's you'll find Filipinos that look. I knew two Filipinos who were very European looking. So it's like the trait. It's not like the genes are washed away and don't appear again.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you're right, Jose. I was a couple of weeks ago. I was walking by in the San Diego waterfront. I saw your stereotypical Mexican family. Um, these women who look very brown and mestizo, and they had a baby carriage, and the baby was blue-eyed blonde.
Hmm.
So the thing about recessive traits is that they don't disappear into the population. They just hide. And the thing is, if you get the right combination, if you get the right Mendelian inheritance pattern, then the blue eye phenotype is going to come back. And I
Very
mean,
true.
yeah. And I mean, and the whole Anglo mindset when it comes to genetics and fitness is like, if you know your evolutionary biology so well, how come you're losing?
Very true. Why
So,
don't your people have more children? I mean, that's the
yeah.
whole entire point of supposed survival of the fitness, maximization of reproduction.
Yeah, I mean, even the Jays don't have such tight a tightwad view of inheritance as the Anglos do. And I mean, even some Anglos, you know what? This whole biological reductionism, looking at everything through an autistic racial lens, I think is a sign of personal failure. I'm just going to put that out there because, you know, um, I
Personal and
don't,
cultural failure.
yeah,
It's a culture of no culture, a religion of no religion. It's when your society's atomized. The society has failed, and
yeah,
that is the inevitable outcome. There's a reason why it was the capitalist West that has fallen so hard for global homo, while those on the or the former communist bloc have not. And it's part of it is because that individualism. Once you have individualism as an ideology, as a norm in how your society is organized,
yeah,
it's inevitable that your families will dissolve. If families dissolve, that dissolves clan, that dissolves tribe, that dissolves nation. You don't have an actual identity to hold on to, and that's where you get this substitution of skin color, which it's mind boggles me how I remember last time I was at like the closest thing to like a family reunion, and you got some people who are as blanco as me, but then you have I got family members who are far darker than Obama. So it's yeah. Anyway, yeah, forgive me the tangent. Yeah, we can keep moving on. Cephas, you there?
Sorry, I muted myself.
Okay.
It's okay. I'm just gonna skip ahead because this is a really long article, and
Yeah, I'd say like just I think in that huge swath section, like those couple paragraphs about comparing men to those in the World War II era. I mean, the one thing she got right is you know yeah, men are much fatter than they used to be, and yes, a man getting fat does affect a woman's view of him,
yeah,
and there is truth that a man really doesn't have to deal with hormonal swings, so he doesn't really even have that excuse for weight fluctuations. So that's the
yeah,
one thing I could say that's positive, but that's it.
yeah. I'm bouncing off that point. I don't think that women hate men per se. I think sexual selection is at play, and women hate what men have become. Fair.
Mhm.
That's fair. That is the fault of men and something to place fairly at their feet. The obesity rate is much discussed, but most obese people are men. They have no pregnancy excuse, no pill, no menopause. They have even tried to meme it in a fat acceptance way as dad bod. WTF. All right, I'm gonna interject right here. Yeah, I didn't mean this to be a stream about fat acceptance, but it's not acceptable to accept acceptance. If you've ever watched Alan Roberts on YouTube, now for a guy who is an atheist, he has a very unintentionally Catholic way of looking at moral theology, because obesity is not just something in the mind's eye, or you're not healthy at every size if your body is carrying more weight than your skeleton or your heart can support. There are consequences to eating too much food, and getting fat is just the least of those consequences, because when you're fat, you have too much you have too much mass for your poor vascular system to support, and hormonally and immunologically, you're in a constant state of stress because you have so much excess calories that it makes it easier for um, bad bacteria to colonize your gut, for instance.
Mhm.
I mean, there's basically a laundry list of things that can happen to you uh, when you become obese. And heck, I'm obese. That,
And there's a spiritual cost too.
yeah,
It's like it's the part that gets ignored because of the materialistic world, the reductionist world that we live in, or
right,
culture that
right.
we live in.
I've been trying to normalize uh, confessing overeating as a sin, because it is a sin. You know, there's no, um, when you consider how easy it is to get calories and how easy it is to get fat, and um, how much of hunger today in the first world is psychological rather than real,
Hmm.
then I mean, this is why Christianity should go hard on uh, fasting as a discipline, because
Hmm.
our Lord fasted. We fasted for 2,000 years. And it's like, unless you're extremely diabetic, a 24-hour fast, let's just say water allowed, a 24-hour fast is not going to kill you.
Hmm.
So, no big deal. Anyway, uh, they're lazy slobs who love beer and wings more than their wife. Don't be shocked if she no longer wants to fornicate you, dude. If you look like a 10-month pregnant woman, she'd have to be a secret lesbian. Do you imagine women don't comment on these developments? Women always handle men with kid gloves because a certain proportion are insane and will snap and kill people if spoken to like fellow adults. on any topic that threatens their Hollywood built ego. Masculinity is fragile in this era, not others. And that's an um, interesting topic for a tangent because uh, it's amazing how much of our worldview is informed by things that are fake. And by that I mean television, internet. Ah, Fonz, what's up?
Hey, what's going on, man?
What's the
What's the
topic?
script? Yeah,
Okay, so we've been going over this blog post. I don't think that this was the greatest format, so I think we should probably just make it a round the table. Or the topic is um, how men have basically let themselves go. How there's been a great loss of masculinity in the post-war era, and how that has broken down relations between the sexes. So,
As told by an as told by an Anglo-Saxon woman.
yeah, from a Darwinist point of view, what are your thoughts on this topic, Fonz?
yeah. It's true. That's all I gotta say. But
Yeah,
we're we're gonna go over resources, or yeah. I mean, it's true. We've been getting weaker
uh huh. Well,
as
the great thing about our current situation is that we all have an opportunity to be stronger because I don't want to sound alarmist, but since March of, well, I'd say maybe even December of 2019, we've been fighting a war. And it's not the type of war like between England and Spain or
well,
Russia and America,
it's a
but
spiritual war first, right?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
That's
Let's just
first and
say
foremost.
let's just say the children of Lucifer and the children of God. And what do you what are the children of Lucifer trying to do to us right now? Punk us, take away our jobs, make participating in society contingent on getting this devil juice injection, and lying about it all the way. So, I mean, something that disgusts me about the past 2 years is that there are many, many people who could have shut this whole thing down by saying, hey, don't listen to the TV. They're full of shit. Listen to what I have to say. Don't watch the fear porn. Just take your vitamins. If you're sick, go home. Anyway, uh da, da, da. Yeah. Yeah, I don't Jose, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess skip ahead a bit in her giant screed to the first moving on part where she says what distinguishes men from mere males is moral authority. So that is true, and I was going to talk about it from a spiritual perspective. Of course, she goes into the whole genetic thing, but it's a case of you identify something a truth, and then extrapolating what do you call it, but from coming from the completely what's the word I'm looking for? Drawing the wrong conclusions from a truth that you encounter. So, like for example, when you take a case of I'm a married man, so in marriage there is a level of authority that a husband does have. And the fact is, a woman when picking a spouse, especially in the circles that I run in, she wants a guy who does have some kind of moral authority. A devout Orthodox girl is not going to, just marry a guy who's a coomer. It's just not what she wants in a husband whatsoever. She wants a man that she can look up to spiritually. So it is true that what distinguishes a man from just some guy. Moral authority is the fundamental underlying thing that is that distinction. And when she says modern men have zero of it, in within the West, that is for the most part true. I mean it's just a fact. And yeah, It's that, yeah, right, as Swan said, it's a spiritual war, and the fact is, for both, in the Anglo-Saxon world, men have to regain that moral authority. But even if I look at Hispanidad, we're just a generation or two behind. We're losing, as on average, losing that authority, and it's something that's a loss that has to be stopped and rebuilt, regained. So
Yeah.
So something I noticed like today, men are controlled by their vices.
Yep.
I noticed my little friend circle and their little TikTok and all that bullshit. Tell them you're wasting your time watching these girls with their big butts, but what's the point of it all? Like, you talking to this woman, or you try to wife her up? No, they already got wives. It's shit like that.
very true. It's ironically, it's guys going to confession. Like if they're let's not even use the word struggling. We'll just say getting their ass kicked by porn. It's yeah, like that's the huge. There's also another sin that comes along with that, which is sloth, wasting time.
Yeah.
Every hour you get, that every minute you get, that's a gift from God, and you have to give an account for it. And it's literally just taking time that's precious and throwing it down the drain.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of, uh, when you have an awareness of your own faults, you'll tend to notice that there's some sins that are brothers, companions, that if you
Or
take on the one, then the two or three or even four others will come to follow. So if you can nip the bud right there, then uh, you know where to stop the disaster before it even starts. So Um, one thing I'm going to talk more about themes than trying to fisk this article because it's going to take forever because it's a huge one. Is that she is very critical about the Manosphere, and that's one of the things that I do. That's one of the things that uh, I would sympathize with her because back in the 2010s, back when uh, the alt right was the alt right was in its infancy, but it wasn't a household word yet. There was this really deluded notion that if men would learn game, they would uh, save Western civilization. And I mean, I can understand where like Dalrock or Vox Day is coming from as far as learning game. But the thing is, it's kind of an equivocal statement because, you know, being firm, having a mission, not being punked by women, these are all laudable things. But for the most part, the Manosphere was all about getting body counts. And so there's an unrighteous mixing of being a real and a good man with trying to bed as many women as you could. And the thing is, uh, I think Roosh finally got some self awareness into the fact that uh, part of what causes that the man has to be responsible for the actual damage that they are doing in the war between sexes because a hoe is not a hoe without a playa, you know?
oh, of course.
A hoe is
Uh,
not a hoe without a weak father. That's that's the core of it. It's oh yeah, I was reading Deuteronomy, and there's a warning that Moses gives to the people of Israel, where he says, "Fathers, do not raise your daughters to be whores, lest the land be filled with whoring."
Yeah, well, I think we're I think we're I think the horse has left the barn there.
yeah, they're Mustangs at this point.
Yeah,
Sadly.
yeah. And you know what? What really slays me right now is that I mean, Hispanos, they have a great reputation as lovers, but the problem is that there's the problem is that that reputation. I mean, you should go as far as you should go as far as virtuous for that reputation, and any further than that is sin. Like yeah, for having that, for the smoking hot Latin lover stereotype, that's great when you're young and you're finding someone. But once you're married, it's time to it's time to you have to be exclusive. That's what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And of course, that has its benefits too, because you don't have large families if one or both you don't have large families unless both of the partners are sexy. Oh no, I lost them.
No,
I
I'm here.
I
It's
killed
Oh,
them with
I'm listening.
I
no.
killed them with my cringe.
I had to quickly talk to my wife about something. I got some family visiting that I have to drive to the airport in a couple of hours. So
Oh, so you're gonna bounce?
no, not yet. I'm here. I might as well be here. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah.
I mean,
Okay, so we
you addressed the her criticism of the manosphere, which
hmm
there's a core there that's right, and then there's a whole lot of screed around it that women speak you gotta just throw out. Um, Another point she had down the line where she talked about um, how in this case criticizing the MGTOW, where she talks about men essentially just being psyched out by their enemies, they decide just to pack up and stop fighting, which is also one of the few accurate criticisms I've seen in here.
yeah, yeah. It is. I don't know where it is in the book of Job, but
That makes me weak. It's
yeah,
pathetic.
to be alive is to fight. So if you just, I mean, a lot of
Demoralized to the point where you're gonna, ignore, God's most beautiful creation.
mhm,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
that.
yeah. I think okay. I think that a lot of guys' problems is that nobody punched them when they were growing up, or they, at the very least, instead of getting into scraps, a more productive way of learning masculine value, masculine virtue, is just to participate in a sport, whether it's martial arts or any team sport. I mean, that's something that I regret growing up, that I never really got into sports, but I'm glad that I got into martial arts at least later in my life, because it teaches you a lot about yourself, and teaches you
No,
about
totally.
what your limits are, and teaches you to fight, basically, because if you shell up in boxing, if you shell up and move backwards all the time, you're going to lose. But you have to use your weapons, and you also have to use your uh, mobility. That's how you win. That's how you defend yourself. Oof, that's how you attack. And yeah, a lot of our problems right now with regard to the virus war, and just the collapse of our society in general, is that there are, there are very few, or there are almost no men who are willing to put themselves at risk to make a better life for themselves, or for, I mean, they're already not willing to stick their neck out for their friends and families. What makes you think that they're going to stick up for themselves? Jose, we talked about this before the stream, that when you're under some sort of corporate attack, uh, there's just no value in being a shrinking violet. You either stand up for yourself, or
stand up for yourself or you get fired.
Yeah.
That's how it
Yeah.
works. Yeah, it's that's also the nature of HR. Like the fact is, if someone is going to try to go after you using the HR, complaints to HR, etc., you also have to file complaints with them. You have to fight back. It's the same thing with like even like if it's self-defense shooting, for example, you have to be the one. You have to call the police. You want to be the first one to file a report with the police before the other person. I know people who've learned that the hard way. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Right.
There's also a corollary too, which I was thinking of because you mentioned before, like this is true. Like if a man won't stick his neck out for his own, then why would a woman want to follow him? But the corollary is true. There are men who do stick their necks out, but they stick their necks out not for what is truly their own, but for some random person's movement. Think January 6th, for example.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely stupid. It's the way I put it is this: like the most, if you're someone who suffers, true injustice, the best thing you can do is creating a strong environment for your own family. And I was doing, when I moved to Texas, I started really researching the history of Tejanos, etc. And I was actually surprised to discover that in the 19th century, Tejanos were actually lynched at 7 times the rate that Black people were. And it's not something I was ever taught in the history books or anything. And frankly, Tejanos don't, they don't complain about it. And it was interesting seeing, reading stuff and looking at, people's response to, that kind of persecution. And the response was, well, if they hang Juan, we're just going to make another 100 Juans or Juanes. That is actually the healthy attitude. They didn't go to Washington, D.C. to complain. They didn't even go to the state capitol in Austin to complain. They just literally, kept, looked out for their own communities, raised a lot of children, and for overwhelming majority of them, be faithful Catholics. That's the actual proper way to stick your neck out.
Right. Right. I think that the one aspect of masculinity that most of the men's movement don't really think about is that the most important part about being a man is taking the hits. Now, it's now it's not sensible to take hits that you don't have to take, but if you're going to pursue a course of action that will inevitably lead to conflict, you must have some stomach for taking a hit. Again, the martial arts metaphor works perfectly here because um, think about boxers with a shorter reach, like Pacquiao or even Mike Tyson. If they were afraid of eating jabs all day, then they wouldn't be champions. But not only do they have a game plan for how to bob and weave and work inside the pocket, they also have great chins because they train at it, and because, well, because they know getting hit is an occupational hazard of being a boxer. So so yeah, that's one of the things that we need to that men need to internalize about being a man, that living will living the way that you want to live will inevitably bestir conflict with other people, and you also have to have both a plan to navigate conflict and uh, internalize the fact that you will get a hit of something, because not only for men but just for living in life in general, death is inevitable. So you have to live a life knowing that, and making a plan for how you're going to leave a legacy, or at the ve- or I guess at a more elevated spiritual level, how are you going to tell God how you used the time he gave you? Right. In fact, I'll just go along, continue reading the article.
No problem.
Men are the rarest thing right now. Even so-called Chad types, sluts aren't as desirable as mates, but okay, aren't reproducing, which is ultimately what women want from men. So, from a biological perspective, it's no wonder the birth rate is down because neither party is getting their needs met. Men for emotional companionship, distracted by hookups, and women for protection and loyalty. Also, do men even like women anymore, or just a wet hole? Hookups are inhumane. They treat other human beings like a sex toy, like a piece of plastic. There's nothing to envy. It's pathetic. Mainly, they are just masturbating into these women for the approval of other weak ego men, homosocial motives. Approval seeking is weak. Men are supposed to validate themselves, and the Manosphere denies them this to sell their lousy books and quote unquote courses. These slutty men are incapable of making love, whatever their claims, so goes through an endless parade of female organ called girlfriends because they cannot satisfy a single one of them with lovemaking, which is newsflash the only thing women want physically. Have you met a sane woman who wanted to be fornicated? Who made them that way? Damage goes both ways, and the book Hooked goes into the brain damage both sexes have from sleeping around, masturbating with other people like a psychopath would. Culture is now psychopathic, so why would women respect men? Sorry, I was just wondering if somebody else logged
Uh,
on.
oh, okay.
It's a culture that hates everything women love: the nuclear family, pair bonding, and commitment to one's family. Now, of course, I'm just going to interject. The nuclear family is an Anglo construct, and it's not so much an Anglo construct as much as it is an American one. Because if you go back earlier in Anglo-Saxon history, they had such thing as kith and clan and all of that. Um, the great thing about having a big extended family is that you have hundreds of natural allies, which I'm sure as Hispanos you'd know a thing or two about.
Oh yeah. No, I grew up in a house with obviously not just the immediate nuclear family, but we also had like two aunts, an uncle, and five of my cousins. It was wonderful.
Yeah. You know, um, getting a bit on the anti-materialistic bend a bit here. Um, people don't Anglos and Anglo Americans don't really get how blessed it is to grow up poor but rich in family. Because when I was like 4 years old, I grew up in a house that didn't even have a refrigerator. So we had to buy ice from the vendor every single day. But um, all of our all of my cousins were just to walk down the street, and some of my I mean, I'm an only child, but I have so many cousins that they may as well be brothers and sisters. So it's it's a great feeling. And the thing is, one of the things that gets my stomach in a knot is feeling about when you have these very pathetically low birth rates. It doesn't just mean that your children are growing up without brothers and sisters. It means that their children are going to grow up without cousins. And the thing is, uh, when when immigrants, whether they're Hispanos or any other immigrant that has a tradition of a large family, what happens when they gringoize is that
They atomize, they get scattered,
true.
especially across the United States. I was actually going to give an example to that. It being so, thankfully, like my family, my wife's family, you have a lot of people who are not practicing birth control. So, my wife and I combined have north of 80 cousins. I think it was
Uh
89 we had counted before, and my wife doesn't actually even know all of her cousins. So
huh.
that was just all the ones that we can name. But unfortunately, we're completely scattered across the entire United States. From
Oh,
from San Diego all the way to Maine. It's whereas when I was living in Colombia, I was living on the same block as a friend of mine, and he had 70 cousins within 5 minutes walking distance of his apartment.
Yeah.
So it's and the other thing too is like people have this idea in America, very common, especially among white America, of especially among like evangelical Christians. They see the cities as being degenerate, and they see the rural as being more traditional. The thing is, like, cities can be traditional if you have intact clans. Take for example my friend's family with 70 cousins within walking distance, and plus an even higher number of second cousins. When you have that many people who are family, who know you, etc. You know, this is not this is a pretty devout family. Like you weren't, even if you're even the black sheep of the family. If he was going to be getting drunk or something, did everything he could to make sure it wasn't obvious. Because you don't want half your cousins, 12 of your cousins seeing what you're up to, etc. So it's much easier to, for lack of a better term, enforce healthy social norms when you have such a large clan that it can do it. That's what's missing in America. And even like taking my generation, my wife's generation, even though we got the numbers, because we're so scattered, we don't here in the United States, even though we're not, I mean, sure, yeah, we're all partially Americanized to some extent, but we're less Americanized than most. But we're not, like, my children are not going to have the experience my friend has in Colombia, because my siblings, my wife's siblings, and all of our cousins, etc., are scattered to the wind across the U.S. And that is, I mean, fundamentally speaking, that's why I hate capitalism. But that's a different story. So.
Yeah. There's this Catholic blogger that I read to this day. She made the point that the car in America is an unintentional contraceptive device. Because think about it. In a car, you can only fit two adults and three children. So I think the norm of the wife and 2.5 children comes from the car. And the thing is, if you, in a human scaled environment, so basically the entire old world or just any place with poor infrastructure, in a human scaled environment, there's no problem with trying to purchase a second vehicle to, or purchasing a minivan to account for a larger clan, because everything is right there. You can walk to everything. You can walk to your job, or your job may be your home, like a proper prieto or campesino, right?
Oh yeah, no, dude, I like. The crazy part is, here in Texas, it's practically illegal to build a city that's walkable. Even in Houston, where they don't have the zoning laws, which is, I guess, the one good thing about Houston, because of their parking minimums and other, regulations they have concerning, land use. It's literally illegal to make a human scale city, in Texas, and frankly, like practically all the United States. The only way you can do it is if you buy, a sufficient piece of land yourself, and you run it privately, and you and your friends, family, what have you, intentionally try to build a villa. I know one group of people who did that in Arizona, and I'm actually been talking to several people here to try to do that. About in Central Texas. But yeah, no, it's amazing how many problems in American society, if one is looking at the I guess more material side of the equation, It's amazing how many problems come just from building something that's at Nephilim scale instead of human scale.
Yeah. All right. So where was I? Where did I? Da, 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 da. Yeah, I guess another. I guess another. I think rather than just trying to continue fisking this article, one of the things that Disenchanted Scholar really hates is race mixing, and her entire basis of criticizing it is those same stalking horses that the Anglos have: Darwinism and IQ. Now, uh, uh, I think the race mixing thing is just it's inevitable, basically, because when populations get sufficiently large and their demands for food and raiment and basic necessities uh, outpace their current home's ability to provide for it, then they're going to move somewhere where they can get everything that they need. Now, we can have a debate about whether current migration patterns are organic or not, and I would argue that they are not organic at all because NGOs are behind so many of them. But um, one of the things that she brings up a lot is that she doesn't like it when British nationals go to Thailand or to Southeast Asia for some exotic hooch, and uh, and mainly the problem she has is that they bring their foreign wives back with them. But the thing is, the entire basis of Hispanismo is race mixing. Or actually, no, the basis of Hispanismo is crown and church. And they
Mm-hmm.
had to figure out a modus vivendi for what to do with all of these new people that they have encountered. And so um, they
It's
did.
also, I was going to quickly follow up and say, it's also why, in the case of like, um, why is it that, those the Anglo-Saxon would consider mixed race in Hispanidad? Why don't they have the same, what's the word I'm looking for? Like racial, and not racial ambiguity, but the same problems that, mixed race kids have in America, where, you have someone who grows up, they're half Chinese, half white, and they don't fit in either. Whereas, for example, like my growing up, the guy who was like a big brother to me, he was a decade older, but he was Korean. He actually married a Colombian girl, and their kids look Mongol except taller, and their kids fit in with Hispanidad just fine. It's what's the word I'm looking for? Like, yeah, it's fundamentally underneath it is Americans don't have a home. Like, there is a culture, like there is an American culture, but it's so weak, it's not able to, like, if it mixes with something else, it disappears.
Yeah.
Whereas you look at Hispanidad, or even you can use Russia as an example, just because I'd say, like, in the Manosphere, we can, Hispanidad is just the number one go-to, but I actually wanted to use Russia as an example of another place in the world where this has happened. The Russians, they intermarried with multiple different nomadic tribes, Turkic tribes, like the Kipchaks, completely intermarried with the Russians, as did the Pechenegs, as did like 40% of the Cumans. And most people are like, well, what are these tribes? And there were Turkic tribes that looked East Asian. They were the Slavs converted them to Christianity, intermarried with them,
Mhm.
and they completely blended into greater Russia. The same thing with the Finns. Most of Finns actually, were evangelized to by the Russians, and most Finns ended up intermarrying with the Slavs. The Finns that exist in Finland were the ones who were like, no, we want to be our own thing, which is why that part of Finland is still Finland, whereas Karelia or the northern part of Russia, that used to all be Finnish-speaking peoples, and they all now speak Slavic, and they're a mestizaje of
Mhm.
Finnish and Slav. And it's interesting because in Ukraine, the United States is backing, they back some neo-Nazi militias who actually call the Russians, what do you call it, mixed blood, because they're Slavs mixed with Finnish and Turkic and other stuff too. The irony being, actually, your average Russian has more Turkic in him than your average Turk in Turkey, because Russia converted so many of the Turkic tribes, which is a whole different story. But yeah.
Well, don't forget that mixing goes both ways, and there's quite a significant admixture with Germans too, because of a bunch of Germans that moved to Russia for work around the 17th century or
Yep.
18th century, I think.
Mhm.
In fact, it was such a large population that they all settled into the Volga, and they're called the Volga Germans. And I don't, well, I mean, if they were distinct enough that they're called Germans, then maybe the admixture wasn't that great to begin with.
Yeah, the Germans didn't intermarry as much, because this is the other thing too. When you look at the mestizaje that happened in both Russia and in Hispanidad, both of them, the mestizaje that happened, it happened within the church. Like, that's the fundamental thing. That's the foundation.
Yeah.
Like the quote unquote race mixing that happened in the Americas, in the Spanish Empire, it was done with the blessing of the church, and it was done within the church. The kids who were being raised were primarily Catholic. In the case of Russia, and you go back to 13th, 14th century Russia, when they were evangelizing the Finno-Ugric tribes, the kids that were raised, they were raised primarily to be Orthodox, and it's fascinating to me how many parallels there are between the two. You can even see the same, although to a far lesser extent, in China with the formation of the Han race, because the Han are a mixture of 1,000 different ethnicities, and what was in this case, it wasn't a form of apostolic Christianity. It was Confucianism and Taoism before it that guided this mestizaje that happened, that formed the Han people.
Yeah.
So, and look, people talk about, like, in this woman, she's complaining about how, oh no, race mixing destroys IQ, and it's like, well, Russians have an average IQ of 99, so apparently intermarrying with all those Central Asians and Turks, etc., didn't drag them down. And the Chinese, well, their average IQ is 106. So there's something else at play besides, mixing of races.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that's at play is that IQ as a measure of anything is kind of like a horoscope. Because I mean, I have a friend in church who I'm go. If he's listening to this, well, too bad. I'm going to say it anyway. He's an actual Nazi, and he says that IQ as a measure of anything is totally false, because intelligence is not primarily a matter of genetics and flesh. It's also a matter of the soul. And if your soul is fed by sanctifying grace, so basically taking Holy Eucharist and always making sure to have a good sacramental confession, then that heals your soul. And like what we Catholics say is that sin darkens the intellect. So if you sin a lot, you're going to be an idiot, which is why you have like these YouTubers who have built their entire channel around binge eating, or people who have a reputation for being coomers. They're not doing so well up in the head, because that's how darkened their outlook is by their vices.
And there are other aspects of it too, and there's definitely an immaterial component to it, because, for example, there's it was interesting. I was looking into some stuff about how to measure IQ in the past, and like Victorian England, the apparent average IQ of the population was 120 relative to today. So British IQ is already dropped by at least 20 points. The genes didn't change. Even by 1950. So like by 1950, the average IQ had dropped by relatively by 20 points, and the genes of the English people didn't change yet. Mass immigration came in, after 1950 for them. In the case of Hispanidad, it's like average IQ of 84 across the whole thing. Yet you look at 1700 Mexico City. Mexico City had the first modern actual modern sewage treatment plant, and it was built by mestizos.
Yeah. So
It's
so
our, yeah, I was just gonna say, like, our ancestors were smarter than we are today. I can even say within my own people I've talked to, like like my grandfather, he was my mother's father. He's a civil engineer, and he was building stuff that even today, like, Americans can't build.
yeah.
There's so much that's being lost today. There's a general dumbing down that's been happening within Hispanidad, within the Anglosphere. It's so ergo, like, yes, do genes play a role? For sure. God gives different gifts to different peoples, different and different levels of that gift to different individuals within those different people groups. Like, I actually, I expect disparities in intelligence, like I expect disparities in height, etc. But it's foolish to reduce it especially something that's immaterial as intelligence, to reduce it to solely material causes is just fundamentally false.
Yeah. And actually, that's interesting that you bring up the first working sewage system in Mexico City, because, Vox Day always says that uh, if you like modern plumbing, then you should stop immigration.
Yeah,
Again, again, it's it is debatable whether, I mean, it is arguable that modern patterns of immigration are uh, not organic, but uh, I mean, if you get invaded by people who know how to build a sewer system, then what exactly are you losing?
there's
Unless,
also, yeah, I was just going to say, like, within Vox's analysis, there is a missing component. The thing is, when you look at, one thing I really love is urban planning, urban design. Ever since, there's a fellow I knew, acquaintance, and he was complaining how, and this was years ago, he was complaining how, like, these racist white supremacist radical Catholic conquistadors, they were building such, like, livable cities, whereas modern progressive America can't build anything like it. And I was laughing my ass off when he was complaining about this. But the fact is, as you mentioned before, when we're talking about the human scale versus Nephilim scale, American cities are not built to the human scale. American sewage systems that were being built in the 1950s before the 1965 Immigration Act, it was already baked into the pie that they were going to fall apart and collapse. With the rise of building cities around the car, which is what was launched, in the Eisenhower administration, it was all built on debt. There was the interstate system that was built can only be debt financed, and it will never turn a profit for the amount of money that they put into it. And the rise of so the thing is this: I'm not anti-suburb. There are actually human scale suburbs. I was actually looking at an outlay of Constantinople. I had seen it when it was, like, the largest city in the world. And it had suburbs. But there were human scale suburbs, and you can look at Rome, you can look at Madrid, you can look at even at London. 500 years ago, they had human scale suburbs. But with the rise of car scale suburbs, you have these. The farther distances you have, or the more spread out you have people across this massive piece of land, the more pipe you're going to need just to hook up everybody to the same sewage system, and that drastically increased costs, and all of that was funded with debts. So when people look at Flint, Michigan, they're like, it's
it's the black people.
It's the black people. It's like, no, you literally, Flint, Michigan's water system was built completely on debt. You do the math, and you can do the math. You're like, okay, this thing is going to be gone, by 2010. Like, it's going to be in shambles. So, but the white people leave, which, to be fair, I don't blame them. They leave because everything's falling apart. And then you have essentially now it's a black city or a black town, but there's nothing. You could replace all those black people with Japanese people in that same city. That water, like, their entire water system is not sustainable. It cannot be fixed. Like, it's literally like you have to abandon you'd have to abandon like most of the city around the city center, shrink the whole population into the center, and then rebuild from scratch a proper water treatment center that is human, or a water system that is human scale.
Yeah.
That's and the thing is, what happened in Flint? You can be in lily white Seattle, lily white, lily white Portland, or even like at this point, 100% Hispano, El Paso, or practically, every single one of these cities in America are built on a scale that cannot be maintained. They're all going to go down that same path. Anyway, that's just
Yeah, yeah. You're almost sounding like Owen Benjamin here, which, I mean, when you uh when you erase the uh Trinity blaspheming and the Eucharist blaspheming and his constantly playing the victim, he actually makes a lot of good points. And uh I mean, with what's going on in the world right now, there is going to be a total systemic collapse. And I mean, I was reading maybe in Rush's forum that the whole point of the pandemic was just to camouflage a true systemic, it was to camouflage a worldwide systemic collapse and to convince people that it was a good thing that they were doing.
hmm. Yeah.
Because
Roosh covered that, and so did Vox. The world was facing financial collapse in March of 2020 when they launched the lockdowns.
yeah. And I guess, wow, it looks like we totally abandoned the topic, and I don't care because I think all that we're talking about is really a lot more interesting. And I think that the way we could just summarize uh, Disenchanted Scholars' entire intellectual oeuvre is Ho's mad, Angla's mad, uh, race mixing bad, but she fails to understand why race mixing happens in the first place.
And
Because
she's not reproducing. That's the other
and she's
part
not
too.
reproducing. So yeah, I mean, at least, well, uh, then find yourself a disenchanted scholar. If you're listening to this, find yourself a good Catholic man, probably from Mexico. He'll set you straight and he'll shut you up and he'll give you handsome babies.
And if you really, really want, a whiter one, like don't worry, they're Mexicans who got my skin tone. I've met quite a few.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, here's another thing that you should consider, Disenchanted Scholar. Mexico is very heterogeneous. It's like, just, I know that pop culture makes all Mexicans look like cholos or uh, what have you, insert Mexican stereotype here. But like saying someone from Baja is the exact same person as someone from Durango or Zacatecas is totally ridiculous. It's like saying that people from California are the same as people from South Dakota.
Very true. It's amazing, and the thing too, across the Hispanidad, it amazes me how you look at the gauchos and the vaqueros, and then the llaneros in Colombia. It's like these people they're literally the same culture, just spread out across all of South America and Central America. It just
Right. I
blows
mean,
my mind.
I mean, I think that I think it's a very Protestant uh, worldview that says that everything has to be flattened and uniform and gray.
Yes.
I mean, there's a greater Hispanic culture, but there are many instantiations of that culture. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
And it's not
Peru.
just Hispanidad. It's you can look elsewhere too. The same thing with China. It's not just one Han. They
Yeah,
got Southern Han and Northern Han and Western Han, and they got
right. And
many
I mean,
individual.
even in China, they don't all they don't all speak Mandarin. or at least
Mhm.
amongst friends and family and neighbors, they don't speak Mandarin. They may have to for school or work, but I had a Chinese boss who said that in Shanghai, you can tell what street somebody grew up in based on their dialect.
Yep. Yep.
So, so I mean, this whole, uh, well, I mean, there's bound to be a homogenization or at least standardization of tongue and culture because, there isn't, like in Spain, there are multiple dialects, and Castilian just happens to be it's what's called the prestige dialect because of all of the Spains, Castile was the one that was the most powerful,
Hmm.
and so it was the language of Isabella, it's the language of Juana, it's the language of Carlos. So that's the one that, well, I think, well,
The other part of it too is Castilian was the one that was spread among all the natives in the New World,
yeah, yeah,
and even in the Philippines. So I was amazed to discover how Filipinos were a lot of Filipinos were Spanish speaking before the American takeover. It was or invasion, which blew my mind. And yeah, apparently the U.S. carried out an equivalent, like what they did in Texas and New Mexico. They carried an equivalent of
yeah.
de-Spanishizing.
I think that my parents were very. I think they were psyoped when they were growing up in the Philippines because when they tell me about Philippine history, it's mostly Black legend stuff, and
Yeah,
they were saying, well, didn't the Spanish didn't allow us to learn anything, and it's like, then how is it that you even have a written language if the Spanish didn't let you learn anything?
why do you have all these universities with Spanish names on it, built with Spanish architecture?
Yeah,
So, man, dude. Yeah, I mean, just because of the nature of me growing up, like, yeah, I was a Colombian extended family within a Filipino neighborhood. I've always had a soft spot for Filipinos in general. It's and to me, it was surprising too, because like in school, it's funny, like even as a little kid, I knew like just because someone had phenotypically looked like me doesn't mean that we were going to be similar. Because I didn't get along, ironically, with the white Anglo-Saxon kids, but I did get along with the Filipinos. And whether there were two in my class who were very white, like as white as me, and then the rest were more traditional Filipino, look, with more traditional Filipino look, and I got along with them great. It was, and then there was a Colombian girl who was black, like black Colombian girl, like very very black, and
yeah,
we clicked just fine. It was crazy, and it was interesting for me growing up in that this is, you could call it my racial awakening of seeing how much conflict there was between the white Anglo-Saxon and the Anglo-Saxon and the Afro-Saxon, and seeing that conflict, and then looking within the Spanish-speaking and in this case Tagalog-speaking bubble, and it's like, we naturally click, and it's you got that whoa, you got that moment where I had that moment where I was like, yeah, my parents want me to be gringo, and you know what? I don't want to be that. So I think my parents are having me give up something that's far more valuable.
well, when I was well, maybe it was because I went to private school from elementary to high school with just an interlude in a public school, which was awful in fifth grade. I mainly had white friends, but yeah, I can totally see where you're going. That um, I always had good. I always got along great with Mexicans. Um, and looking back, um, one of the Mexican girls was totally cute, and I think she was trying to flirt with me, but I was such a nerd that I didn't really do or say anything. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, you got an opportunity to correct that coming up, so that's the good news.
yeah,
It's
that's true.
and this is interesting. Like, I actually didn't have white friends until I met Southerners, Dixie and Texans, And it's amazing to me because, as I mentioned before, early on in the stream, I talked about like, surprising to see, how the Tejanos were treated, and they really got a short end of a stick. But you look at, it's interesting how they didn't complain about it. They persevered, they endured, they grew. And it's interesting how you can read about the deportations that happened in the 20s, early 20s, and then, in the 40s, etc., where the U.S. actually expelled a lot of people who are, who went back, 400 years, in old New Spain, they stripped them of their citizenship and sent them back to the Rio Grande. And yet the Texans, or the Tejanos, they just keep having babies. And you can see that influence in Texan culture. I mean, I'm pretty sure, OG is covered where, what do you call it? Like Texan cowboy culture, it comes from, the vaqueros.
Yeah.
There's so many, barbecue, it comes from barbacoa, which, of course comes from the, the Taino, the Arawak speaking peoples. It's amazing to me. So like, there's definitely Texas and Dixie are different. And fundamentally the difference, what separates the two is Texans have been somewhat Hispanicized.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I like Dixie culture, even though it is an Anglo-Saxon culture, but it is an Anglo-Saxon culture that does have a sense of honor, that does have a sense of family, which granted is being what's the word I'm looking for? It is being destroyed in them because the U.S. system, the Zog system, wants to grind that out. But there is a culture there that I can respect. And in the case of the Texans, it's so interesting to me how, even though there was, for lack of a better term, injustice done towards the Hispanos that were living there beforehand, Texans have been migrating towards Hispanic culture, and to the fact that you can see it just blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, one of the guys in Social Galactic, his handle is Eugenius Bear. He's a white Catholic, but he says he used to live in Texas, and he said, yeah, we actually get along very well with the Mexicans because our culture is basically the same.
Yeah, no, that's it. If you remove the Protestantism and the Masonry in particular, you remove that out of Texas and you put in like an ancient faith worldview, like an apostolic worldview, apostolic faith in there. Yeah, it is for lack of a better term, it is the same. It's fascinating. It's like, I'll be honest, this is me, again, speculating, but because I've tried to move. I've lived in Colombia. I've moved back, twice, and I got ripped back to the United States both times. My spiritual father told me to stop trying to flee the United States. So ever since I was 17, like in high school, I recognized the U.S. was heading for civil war. I had read my grandfather's journals. He got to see the rise of the Colombian Civil War and everything, and a lot of stuff he was seeing in the 40s. I was seeing as a 17-year-old in the 2000s. And I was like, yeah, I want to get out of the U.S. And but yeah, so I tried like crazy to get out. Ironically, like you have the SG thing, Social Galactic people chanting, you got to go back. It's like no, I literally went back, and God pulled me back to the U.S. twice. And my spiritual father told me, don't try to go again. You're supposed to be here. So I'm here. And when I look at what's happening in Texas, I see an opportunity to undo the damage that was done 500 years ago when King Henry VIII divorced Catherine of Aragon. Because when I look at the whole of the conflict between Hispanos and the English, I trace it back to that event, like that divorce.
Yeah.
That divorce I see is the source of all the conflict that has happened down the line. Also, and even some people say like it's the religious difference, but the religious difference even happened because King Henry VIII wanted to divorce Catherine. Like that act of divorce led to essentially a 500-year war. And here in Texas, there's actually an opportunity for real reconciliation to reconcile, what the harm that was done 500 years ago, the disgrace that was done to Catherine 500 years ago. When people talk about like the Spanish Armada was going to go into England and make it all Catholic, it was a holy war. There's an aspect of that is true, but when you read like what the king actually said about it, like he wanted to avenge his family member. King Henry VIII, disgraced I forget the relationship if Catherine was his aunt or great aunt, but he had disgraced a family member in front of the whole world.
Great aunt,
Great aunt,
because
thank you.
Katarina was the aunt of Charles.
Got it. Yeah. So like it was like the primary reason was he wanted to avenge his great aunt's honor, and that's and that what do you call it? So that's why I wonder. Part of me is wondering, like, maybe me being here, is that part of it? Like here, I have a friend who's descended not from Sam Houston, but like from one of Sam Houston's like cousins. So and he married a Nicaraguan girl. There's quite a lot of shall we say, reconciliation via marriage within. In my case, I'd be arguing, the Orthodox Church is the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, but it's within. There is the unity that existed before can be redone or can come back through the apostolic faith.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm coming at it from the Catholic side of things, but I think there may be some providential role that the Eastern Orthodox Church will play in reuniting the two churches, because as much as I like to tell people that the Catholic faith is true and there's a lot of great things about it, I love the devotions and everything. The problem with Catholicism right now, the number one impediment to getting people to convert is the Catholic hierarchy. I mean, uh, we tell Protestants that, oh, we don't uh, we don't transgress our dogma because we have bishops, and we have bishops like Cardinal Topin, Night Night Baby, and of course there's Bergoglio. But uh, Eastern Orthodox, whatever differences we may have with them, they do have valid apostolic succession, and what's more important is that they have perspective that that the Western Romans don't have, and that they know what it's like to be a church in captivity.
Mhm.
And I would argue that right now Rome is actually under American captivity, especially if you look into Operation Gladio.
Yes.
Um, and I mean, I don't want to give Sedes any ammo, but I think with all the chicanery that's been happening since the post-war era, kind of have to wonder if the papal election process was not contaminated in some way, or if we're not reliving some uh, 20th, 21st century version of the investiture crisis.
I hate to break it to you, but the answer is yes. I was actually looking up. There's a book written by an actual cardinal, first-hand account of the Rockefeller infiltration into the Vatican. I know Michael Jones's site is actually selling it, and I plan on buying it at Christmas time. But yeah, it's the okay. I guess I don't need to rehash the whole history here because I'm pretty sure you're aware of some of it because I've talked about a lot of it on Social Galactic. But the United States, it was established as a Masonic republic. The goal of it was to establish a new Atlantis,
Yep.
as was written out by Francis Bacon, 500 years ago. Whoa! So there is the main goal is, establishing a new world order, and of course, destroying the ancient faith, destroying the apostolic faith. And when you look at, in particular the Rockefellers in the 19th century, they had a very easy time subverting the Protestants. They were very easily able to corrupt the seminaries of the mainline Protestants with
Yeah.
money.
Yeah, that's something that Vox doesn't seem to understand. The reason why the Southern Baptists got corrupted was because they were corrupted to begin with.
Yep. Yeah. And in the case of, the Rockefellers, their goal, and Carnegie put a lot of money into this too, as did Mellon J.P. Morgan and others, but their goal was to infiltrate the Roman Church as well as the Orthodox churches. They messed up with the Orthodox churches, and I'll go into that a little later. But in the case of the Roman Church, their goal was to creep into the Vatican and take it from the top, and that was their strategy. And people can debate how much success they've had, but even someone like is it Bishop or Archbishop Vigano, or I forget what rank he is.
He's an archbishop, but it's
Archbishop.
titular.
Oh, he's a titular archbishop. All right. So yeah, for him, for example, it's the fact is it's true. They infiltrated in, and this is something that the Orthodox world can't really throw darts at, because David Rockefeller was the one who was overseeing the attempt to take over Constantinople, and they did get their guy. This might be less popular in Orthodox circles, but 1920s, the guy who pushed through the new calendar reform, that guy, he had a lot of ties to the Rockefellers. Where the Rockefellers messed up with the Orthodoxy, they were under the impression that the Patriarch of Constantinople had the same kind of power in terms of authority as the Pope of Rome, which he doesn't. Which is why, after Constantinople started, shall we say, throwing wrecking balls around, all the other patriarchates effectively banned any organization with fund or any group with names like Rockefeller or Ford or Carnegie from giving them money. And that's why the damage from the American regime in the Orthodox world was contained more or less to Constantinople.
Yeah.
So it's but that's their goal. They want to destroy. Christ promised that the church would stand till till he comes back, and even though the demons know this, that their goal is still to destroy what Christ has built.
Right. Well, funny thing about demons is that they're smarter than all of us. Even the dumbest of them are smarter than the smartest of us. It's like, because they know they're going to hell, their sole goal during their time they have in this age is to bring as many people with them as they could, and it brings them no benefit. It's purely spiteful. Yeah, the mindset of a demon is purely destructive, and that's the sort of mindset that you will have if you do not conquer your vices, if you do not try to rectify your faults. Yeah. Yeah, we've gone so far off topic that I don't even care about getting back on, but if you're listening to this, Disenchanted Scholar, drop the Darwinism, stop being such a bitch, and convert to the true faith.
Embrace tradition. Like, that's the irony. This is the irony. It's because the more I look at it, it's because people like I sympathize with Americans in the sense that you are losing your heritage, your country. I mean, in the case of America's really screwed. Australia, the same deal. But here's the irony: if you Christ said, he who seeks to save his life will lose it, and he who will lose his life for my sake will keep it. That applies with nationhood as well. If you strive to operate with number one being your love of your nation, you will lose it. If you put the faith first, you put God first, and faith and you strive, like, even if you have nothing but loyalty to Him, and that's all the only virtue you have to offer God. If you do that, He will give you your nation back. Like, that's what happened to the Russians, 800 years ago, when they were shattered into pieces by the Mongols. God gave them their nation back, even when they're under the Mongol yoke.
Yeah.
And the thing, and my prayer is God will do the same thing for Hispanidad, because we were shattered into 24 something pieces, by the Bank of England and the British Crown. My whole thing is honestly, for us to really come back as a nation, one, it's going to take centuries, or as a civilization. One, it's going to take a couple centuries, but two, the way to do it is through the faith. Holding to the faith, forming families, teaching our children, populating the monasteries, which in turn raise spiritual children. You need both of those things together. That is how you do the Reconquista. Like this Reconquista is going to be spiritual.
Right.
That's what it is. That's what it's going to take. And right now it looks like it's not even possible. Well, guess what? You had Pelayo. He only had 300 men standing standing against the Muslim hordes who had taken
Yeah.
over practically all of Iberia, and he won with the aid of the Mother of God, and and he managed to establish Asturias, and out of that seed, God reestablished all the ethnicities that make up Spain, and out of that you had the Spanish Empire. The same thing with Russia when they were shattered to pieces into the different city states like Moscow and Novgorod and Moscow, etc. God brought them back together, and He made them greater than what they were before. The same thing, and you could say with Spain. Spain was just a province of Rome, but after Spain far exceeded what it was before the Islamic conquests. The same
Yeah.
can be true for Hispanidad today, and the thing is, the same can be true for the Anglo-Saxon. And honestly, this is the irony. I actually want Anglo-Saxons to embrace actual Anglo-Saxon culture. So this might not be the most popular for you in regards to saint kings in history, but the human saint, king, who was the best prototype of what an ideal king should be, was Saint King Alfred the Great, and he was an Anglo-Saxon. And ironically, he helped form the modern Anglo-Saxon, or form the Anglo-Saxon people through mestizaje. But that's different story, because he brought the different various tribes that together became what we call the Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about Anglo racial purity is that it's only it only looks that way if you take a certain snapshot of history,
Mhm.
because the Angles and the Saxons, and I guess you can throw the Jutes in there too,
Yep.
were invaders from Germany and Denmark, or what is now Germany and Denmark, and they pushed the Brittonic peoples uh, into Wales, into Scotland, and and the thing is, these new these Anglic kingdoms were themselves invaded and conquered by the Normans,
Yep.
who were Norsemen who were Frankified.
Yep.
So Lindy Beige likes to say, "No, we weren't conquered by the French." Except, what language were they speaking, Lloyd? They weren't speaking Norse. They were speaking French.
French. Yep. Yeah. They were
Yeah.
franchise Normans, and that's the other part too. You had the franchise Normans. It's the other part too. You had Normans who were Greekified, that were Orthodox. Actually, this is the irony too. So after Harold, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England, when he was when he died and the Normans took over. So part of the deal that William the Bastard got, in order to back, he wanted to get papal backing for his claim to the throne of England, and part of the deal that he got with Rome was if he brought the Anglo-Saxon, Welsh, and Scottish and Irish churches underneath, back underneath the Roman fold, because they're autonomous, prior, that or under direct Roman control, then they would back him, and they would recognize his kingship, which is fascinating when I was reading that, looking into the Norman invasion. But there were several Anglo-Saxons that, interestingly enough, didn't want to be under Rome. And this is 1066, and I found this really interesting. And they were given safe passage to move to the Byzantine Empire, and they settled in what is now modern day Crimea. So you had a bunch of Anglo-Saxons get settled in modern day Crimea, where they intermarried with Greeks and others, and eventually conquered by the Mongols and the Tartars, and eventually reunited with Russia today. But there's actually there were Orthodox Anglo-Saxons in Crimea of all places, and they built English towns with English names. It was crazy.
Yeah. Those Varangians, man. I'm surprised that Varangian guards were not the unique unit of the Byzantines in Age of Empires 2. But
Yeah.
then again, I think that cataphracts were a lot cooler. I don't know,
Yeah.
there's so many. There are now 31 civilizations in Age of Empires 2, when originally there were just 13. And I, I, I'm not too fond of them because uh, some of the new civilizations are spin-offs of other new civilizations. Like
Mhm.
in Forgotten Empires, you got the Slavs, and now in Dawn of the Dukes, you have the Lithuanians and the Poles. It's like
Yeah.
you just split the Slavs into three parts. What are you going to add the Rus next? So then, what's the point of the Slavs if you have the Poles, the Lithuanian, not the
Yeah, the
Lithuanians?
Bulgarians. Yeah, so they
Yeah,
got the Bulgarians who are Slavic as a separate thing from the Slavs. They got the Poles who are Slavic separate from the Slavs. You got the Bohemians who are Slavs. Yeah, and Lithuanians are Baltic, but it's shared history,
yeah.
right?
I meant Bohemians, not the
Yeah.
Lithuanians. But yeah, I mean one of the OG civs was the Mongols, and
Hmm.
now they have the Cumans and the Tatars. That's like,
Wait, they got the Cumans in there?
yeah, they have the Cumans now.
Oh, and I know they had the Kip. Didn't they have? Do they get the? Are the Kipchaks in there, or is there a
The,
unit called the Kipchak?
there's a unit called the Kipchak.
Okay, that's ironic. So, because the Kipchaks were like an actual people group that all
Yeah.
converted to Orthodoxy, there was actually a Kipchak, autonomous Kipchak Orthodox Church that they had their churches, and they actually had an actual basilica were yurts, like giant, massive yurts with the interior being woven icons and everything. And I actually found out this past year the liturgical books in Kipchak still exist. They're still preserved. It's just no one speaks Kipchak anymore because they intermarried with the Russians. But there actually are directions on how to make a basilica out of a giant yurt that you can pack up, kind of just like the tabernacle in the Old Testament. You to pack up and move with you. It's just so fascinating. That whole evangelization. The two nations that have spread the gospel the most prior to the 19th century was Spain and Russia.
Uh-huh.
It's fascinating to see, and the rise of Protestantism. Frankly, actually, the real rise of Protestantism was the Pentecostal movement. That seems to convert a lot of people. But of course, I'm
Right.
kind of in the position that the Pentecostal movement is a form of syncretic shamanism. So
Yeah, plus I think that Pentecostalism has a lot of ties with WCC, so
yep.
so so there's your global homo right there.
Yeah, yeah, it's I don't know, it's crazy, and this is something actually I found amazing to me. And what do you call it? Like, so because my parents I mean, they're essentially Americanized, 100%.
Uh-huh.
Same thing with my aunts and uncles. Like everybody, except for one uncle who stayed in Colombia, and ironically, he's probably the best off of all of his siblings because he's the only one who isn't up to his eyeballs in debt. Because that's the real reason, one of the real reasons why they want immigration to the United States, to make you debt slaves.
Yeah.
So there's an irony for you. The one guy who decided to stay in Colombia, he's like, nah, I want to stay with, stay in my culture. He ends up wealthier because he didn't go in debt, even though he made less money. Because
Yeah. The thing about American wealth is that it's such a mirage
Mhm.
because, as you say, it's mainly driven by debt. And the thing is, historically, when debts couldn't be repaid, um, what people did was just tell the creditors, "Chinga tu madre." There's
Yeah,
nothing you can do about it, so just go away. But I mean, the thing is, the creditor class and the American military might are so married at the hip
yep,
that you can't get rid of one without the other.
correct.
So
And that is the fundamental thing about the United States, the U.S. government, the U.S. system. The U.S. system is ultimately loyal to the creditor. They will enslave like whole nations, like they will genocide people just to make sure the creditor gets paid.
yeah,
That's just the reality. That's just the reality of the American system. So
uh huh,
it's I look forward to this banking empire collapsing.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I forget where I was coming from because there was another point I had, but I forgot it. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm not too fond of the China boosterism that I'm seeing in the community. Uh, what I will say though, because I've actually worked in a Chinese company and it was hell on earth. But the thing is, I will say that if the Chinese want to take over, if as long as they don't touch the faith,
Hmm.
then I think we can be cool. If they want to convert, even cooler. But if they try to push that, but if they try to push state atheism here, then it's going to be the second Cristero War, man.
Yeah,
There's there's going to be no quarter asked or given. And speaking of the second Cristero War, I would argue that we're in one right now. And I mean, I won't I'm not going to appropriate Mexican history because that's their thing, but um the
it's because we
second
all recognize Mexico as the oldest brother,
yeah,
of all of us. Technically, one could even argue they're the older brother of modern day Spain because they were the center of the empire. Mexico City was the financial center, the industrial center, the wealth center, etc. And the fact is, what you see in Mexico is, it happened everywhere else too. Just
yeah. Yeah, well, I meant a Cristero War in the fact that there is a war of the elites versus the people, and the people have virtually no institutional support, but they have all that they have going for them right now is their faith, to the extent that anyone has faith at all.
mhm.
I mean, say what you will about Andrew Torba. Um, I don't really know him very well, but he has, I think, the right sentiment that you have to divorce yourself from the anti-Christian culture and build a viable alternative,
Yep.
because the alternative to Christianity right now is death.
Yeah.
There's just there's no choice. And the thing is, just because you happen to be a cleric or label yourself as a Christian does not necessarily mean that you are on the Christian side. Because in the Cristero War, there's only one. I believe in the Cristero War, there's only one bishop that supported the Cristeros, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So it's like,
They had more support from the priests than they did from the hierarchy.
yeah, exactly. I mean, Uh, I don't know if you've ever read the blog of Francis Berger. He's a guy in Hungary. He identified what he calls, well, actually, I think it was Bruce Charlton, but they both identify as something that's called system Christianity, in that it's basically churchianity. It's basically the Catholicism of Pope Francis, or basically you could say the entire post-conciliar Catholic Church, the spirit of Vatican II, if you will, in that the church is not the system church is not the church. Well, even though it could claim descent, apostolic succession going all the way back to Christ, by their words and deeds, they are more aligned to the world than they are to the Great Commission. And it really shows in the past 2 years. So just
Yeah.
because you could be a priest, a bishop, an archbishop, you could even be the Pope, but if you don't act with the faith, then you're not a Cristero, simply put.
Hmm. And it's something that there's a lot of warnings about. Of course, I'm more familiar with sayings of the modern Orthodox saints or the more recent Orthodox saints. So, I mean, I know you're familiar with Father Seraphim Rose, and even he talks about the religion of the Antichrist and how it's going to be it is the plan. The demonic plan is for a pseudo form of Christianity that takes on the appearance of the apostolic Christianity, but it's just a skin suit. It's the ecumenism, the religion of nice. These are all different aspects of it. And of course, you got plenty of you have Orthodox saints, from Saint Paisios to Elder Ephraim, who's and I know it's going to be a little while before he's canonized, but they talk about themselves about they were giving warnings to people like, hey, there's going to be a time where you're going to have to travel for hours to find a solid priest who can administer the medicine of the church to you, and that's true. It's the irony is my plan was to move to South Texas, because my wife, and I, we want to live in some place where everything's 100% Spanish speaking, land and housing, etc. is way cheaper, more of a cultural fit. But the thing is, we found a rock solid priest who's been such a blessing to both of us, and the thing is, when you find someone who can be a spiritual father, you can't just be with them for a couple of years and be like, all right, you pick up and leave, because whenever you do that, you're going to be starting from ground zero all the time. Every time you move, you switch up priests, and so our parish moved northward, more towards the Anglo-Saxon part of Texas, and we're following our priest going northward because it's been a blessing to our marriage, blessing to each of us. Both of us in the past couple of years have broken free of sins that we've struggled with since respectively from our childhood. It's the other part of it's like, what do you call it? That's what matters. And it's on both sides of the aisle. Like you really got to I highly recommend putting in the work to find someone who can be a spiritual father. Like if you find, if right now you got a great priest, but they're not spiritual father category. Like what a lot of people I know do, they'll go to some of the the monastery. In our case, the Ephraimite monasteries, and they'll find someone who can be a spiritual father to them. And they'll go, they'll talk with their spiritual father, once a month or what have you, or once a quarter, depending where they are in their life. But it's in the distance they have to travel. But that is something that is immensely necessary. And ironically, in the case of Saint Paisios, it's funny because he was giving, I'll just say he was talking a whole lot about stabbies and other stuff that was coming, and and his one of his students, Elder Ephraim, well, actually technically weren't students, they were friends, but the Elder Ephraim actually had prophecies concerning people will be terrified of germs, and they would insist on wearing in his words clown masks in church, and they would be spraying spraying door handles before touching them, and they would refuse to kiss icons, etc. Soon. That was his words, and he died in 2019. But the thing is, the irony is, Saint Porphyrios told Saint Paisios to, it's like, hey, it's great that you're warning people about what's coming down the line, but those people down the line, they're going to need solid priests. So focus more on, being a spiritual father to young men who can become solid priests for the trials that are coming. That I find to be very interesting. Is like you have a saint who's literally predicting the future that we're in right now, and he's got a bunch of other things too. And at the time, there was a fellow saint who said, hey, let's focus on making sure that the people going through these crazy times are going to have solid priests. That's I love it. I love it. It's and it's I mean, the thing is, God gives enough of a heads up, and He'll see us through. We just got to persevere. And I mean, we don't know how bad things are going to get. Based on my understanding, I believe the persecution is going to be overwhelmingly psychological. Like even today, like people talk about the mandate for private employers, and it's like, there was a press release, still waiting to see an executive order like actually be signed. It's amazing to me how much you said it before, I think earlier on in the stream, but how much of this is just men folding because they don't want to take the psychological pressure, and a lot of it I believe is because of the fact that so many are enslaved in sin. It's it's funny because I talk with a lot of Protestants, and they'll be like, oh, I'm struggling with this, struggling with that, specifically, struggling with porn. And, the response I got is, no, you're not struggling with porn. Your ass is being kicked by it. Like, let's be real here. And the reason is because whatever Protestant faith you're in, the charismatic, the Lutheran, the Calvinist, the fact is they don't have the tools in the toolbox to help you exercise that sin out of you. You're not going to find, if you want to find healing, you're not going to find it there. And what I tell people who ask, like, why Orthodoxy over Rome? Fundamentally, it's because what I found was Orthodoxy had the tool sets I needed to break free, of various sins that I've been a slave to forever. And that fundamentally, it's that's what I tell people. Like, when they realize, okay, the apostolic faith is the way to go, which is the way that I'm supposed to go. Orthodox Rome. That fundamentally, I say that look at that level, and if you want more depth after that, then look at Orthodox saints for the past 1,000 years and Roman saints for the past 1,000 years after that. Which ones do you want to be like more? That'll be another thing, but it's that is why so many people have folded. I was reading about how, like, 100 years ago during the Spanish flu, the U.S. government, they tried to they require masks everywhere and force vaccinations, and people were lynching federal employees in the streets because they weren't complying. Today, everybody complies, and why? Because everybody's a slave to their sins. Americans are, as Vox likes to say, deracinated, demoralized, denationalized. But the reason why the men have no strength is because it's completely sapped. For most of them, it's completely sapped on porn. And then the ones where it's not completely sapped on porn, you have sloth, gluttony, and all the other host of vices that are pushed in American society. And if you're a slave to those vices, then you're just going to fold whenever the wind blows, whenever just a little bit of demonic pressure comes.
Yeah. Co-sign totally. What was I going to add? Not much to add, really. Other than I would say that there were two things in my life that totally obliterated my germophobia, or the germophobia that the average person is psyoped into having, at any rate. The first is that my very first job, we were we were growing up cultures of E. coli to grow plasmids. And the thing is, when I saw that my coworkers, their only protective gear was gloves, it's like, oh, well, E. coli isn't that bad, isn't it? The second thing that got rid of my germophobia was when I got chrismated into the Orthodox Church and I took communion from a spoon.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I read on the internet was that it's the blood of Jesus Christ. It can't make you sick.
Mm-hmm. You actually reminded me of something, because I remember there was a stream a while ago. You were talking, I think it was with Isidore. You were talking about the importance of. I know you're coming from a Western point about how there has to be there's a need for a higher view of the Eucharist, and you were talking about. You had mentioned how, like, you have. There, like, what you saw in the Orthodox Church was the level of protection there is of the chalice and everything. Mm-hmm. So actually, like, I used to altar serve up until July. I've had an autoimmune condition that acted up, and I can't serve till that goes back into remission. But there was actually an incident early this year, and it's where there was actually a point where the deacon, myself, and the other altar server actually had to use force to protect the chalice. And it was a very interesting experience. But yeah, it's amazing. It's what do you call it? The Eucharist is amazing. That's all I could say. And it's, as you mentioned before, like, the same spoon. That's good. I'm glad it broke your germophobia.
Yeah. In fact, I wonder why. Well, obviously the answer is Trent, but I was wondering why the body was the normative means of distributing the sacrament rather than the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And I already answered my question. It's because of Trent, but supposedly it's because with the host, it's easier to control the spread of particles. But I mean, you could say the same with the blood too, because it's all going to come back into the same chalice, and the priest is going to consume it all anyway, and he's going to he's going to wash it several times so that he gets every last bit out.
Hmm. Interesting. So in Rome, the priest is the one who consumes the rest of the gifts.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's a deacon's job in Orthodoxy. So it's
Well, I mean, here in the SSPX, we don't really have deacons simply
okay.
because it's a priestly formation society. So if you're a deacon, that means that in a year you're going to become a priest.
Okay, got it. Yeah, here it's so we actually have so we got a married priest and we have a celibate deacon. It's actually quite normal for people to once they become a deacon, or for men who become deacons to stay deacon. Depending on the needs of the church.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know men who've been deacons for 30 something years. I just find it interesting where it's like it's because I visited parishes where you have a hierarch monk serving, so a monastic priest with a married deacon, and my home parish is a married priest with a celibate deacon. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually the point that I wanted to get back at is that in 2020, if you found a priest who was willing to if you found a priest who's willing to go the extra mile and possibly put his neck out to hold the mass,
Hmm.
you found gold basically. And that's why, I mean, on Catholic Twitter there's a lot of circular firing squads about who's real trad and who's bad trad, etc., etc. Well, just showing up, just showing up is what quelled my fears about, quelled my misgivings about the SSPX. And not only that, if you read or heard any news about a priest in California fighting Gavin Newsom and winning, that
Hmm.
was my priest. So you do have a good point about if you have a really beneficial priest, you have to stick with him. But the
Hmm.
problem with the society, well, it's not really, well, it's a problem, but it's also a good problem to have, is that those guys are so overworked, man.
Hmm.
Because that priest in particular, he has to say mass in LA in the early in the morning. I think he serves several masses. Then he drives to San Diego to say a mass. Then he drives back to LA to go to sleep. They like that one priory probably covers half of California and also Nevada. So these
Wow.
guys do not rest. So we're blessed to have them, but we uh we know they need a break, and unfortunately, um I don't know that there's enough. I don't know that there's enough of a qualified pool in all of the earth to replace these guys. But I come back to this miracle, and again, this is uh, East-West, um, cultural exchange. Did you ever hear about that miracle in Romania about a church that was they didn't have a priest and they were in danger of not being able to have the liturgy that Sunday? And uh, there was a priest that showed up and he did the divine liturgy, and everybody was amazed. And it's like they're thinking, "Wow, where'd this guy come from?" And so they looked at the records, and who the guy who celebrated the divine liturgy that day was Saint Nectarios, who was dead
Wow.
for 150 years.
Wow. Okay, I did not hear
So,
about that.
so it's like, remember, this is our religion is a religion of miracles. So if it looks like there isn't a priest, you might be wrong. You,
Yeah, yeah. It's funny too. I mean, that people call that as big miracle. Big miracle. There's a tiny miracle that I experience every single time I commune, which is. I mean, people talk about the Eucharist itself being a miracle. Like, no, it is. So I'm actually deathly allergic to wheat, and in Orthodoxy there is no such thing as a gluten-free host.
uh-huh.
By all natural science, I'm supposed to be breaking out in hives every time I commune, and literally nothing happens every single time. And it's yeah, that I remember going into it. Because my parents' generation, they're all Catholic apostates, for lack of a better term. It's the so going into it, I remember because my wife was actually concerned for me because she's seen me when I've had bad reactions, and I remember her actually asking one of the priests, like, is it possible to have a gluten free host? And they're like, no, it's not. Yeah, you're just gonna have to you're gonna have to trust that this is actually Christ's body and blood, and it's so I still remember that first communion. It was Pentecost 2020 for me. Like I was attending a part of an Orthodox parish for a long time before I actually got chrismated. But I still remember taking communion that first time, or having communion that first time, and nothing happened to my body, and I was like, holy cow, this thing is real. Like, this is real. This is crazy. So like tiny miracles like that. No, that's it's a tiny miracle that happens every single time I commune. So every time I go up, there's a little bit of trepidation, like, but it's amazing. It's amazing, man. And I know they made a movie of Saint Notarios recently, and I do plan on watching that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we're a little past 2 hours, so I guess we can adjourn here.
All
Um,
right.
so because Mr. Vladimir Vladimirovich is still listening, I'm going to close this out in the Eastern way. Holy God, holy mighty, holy mortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy mighty, holy mortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Holy immortal, have mercy on us. Dynamis. Oh, I can't think of a verse.
Holy
Holy
God,
God,
holy
holy mighty,
mighty, holy
holy
immortal,
immortal.
have mercy on us.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Night.